Hello there, and good evening, morning, wherever you are in the world. I've just decided to go live this evening. It's now 6:23, 3 minutes late from when I scheduled. But what I wanted to do is just share some of the key reflections that I took away from genuinely one of the most impactful podcast conversations I've ever heard. If you're not already connected to or following Whitney Johnson's work, she has a podcast called Disrupt Yourself, and that's the one I'm referencing today, which is just absolutely sensational. And Whitney had a conversation fairly recently with the CEO, just an incredible human being. I've not had the pleasure to speak with her myself, but just listening to her, she's so inspiring. And her name is Aisha Evans. And the company's called Zoox. It's not a company I've heard of before, but they're focusing on developing the software, basically for this new generation of autonomous vehicles, or AVs. And something just really, really got into my soul around this conversation. You can listen to a conversation, you can take something away, you can think about how you try and apply some of that learning into your own life. But when you get touched like on an energetic, spiritual, in your body level, I just had to share what some of those reflections were with you. So if you go into the post, if you're looking now on LinkedIn, on Facebook, or on YouTube, you'll be able to see down in the post notes, there's a link to the podcast, there's a link to Aisha's LinkedIn profile, and also to Whitney Johnson's profile, and also her books. If you haven't read Build an A-Team, you hadn't read Disrupt Yourself, please, please, please go and buy them. They are incredible books, and they're sort of ahead of their time, really, when we think about the disruption that's occurred over the last 12, 18 months. We're all ripe for disrupting ourselves following this pandemic, or as we navigate this pandemic. So please do go and check out her work. But back to this conversation this evening. So excuse me as I look down, but I want to just check on these notes, because the thing that really struck me, I'm finding that I'm quite a systemic thinker. I understand the world through multiple different lenses, how things join together. And what I took away as 4 key threads from this conversation between Whitney and Aisha were around. One was around mindset or philosophy. Another one was around teamwork and culture. A third was around self-awareness. And a fourth was around vulnerability. Now, why this is so exciting for me personally, for anyone that knows me, I had a podcast called Value Through Vulnerability, and actually I'll pop that up on the screen now. If you've not listened to any of those conversations, I recorded 138 conversations. One went out a week, every week from May 2018 through to October 2019, October 2020, with episode 100 with my good friend and Humans First movement founder, Mike Vacanti. And these conversations are all about courage, vulnerability, self-awareness. But to be honest with you, it's not easy finding, or I didn't find it easy at that time, to find people working in a corporate setting that were prepared to have this conversation about what does it mean to be human in the workplace? What does it mean to be vulnerable? How do we show up with more courage? How do we create these safe, brave spaces to have more difficult conversations? Like, there just wasn't the role models out there. And that's why I'm so excited and wanted to take my time to bring this insight and this reflection to you, whether you're watching me live, whether you watch it at some point in the future. I just really wanted to sort of timestamp this moment in time for this conversation, because I think it's a critically important conversation. So let me share some of those insights with you. So I mentioned about mindset and philosophy. So please do go and listen to the podcast. Whitney shares 6 key takeaways, but I'm going to share a number of other takeaways as well with you that really moved me through this conversation. So one of the first things, and these aren't linear, these are very much grouped by me around these different themes. What Aisha shared is that if it's disruptive, if it's impossible, but it's worthy, it gets my juices flowing. And it just really spoke to me personally, because, whether you call it disruption, whether you call it challenging the status quo, I really feel grounded in 2 of those areas that Aisha's focusing on, which is, me personally, I love disruption, I love new, I love reimagining, and I also love a good cause. I love, really doing stuff that's meaningful, working in a meaningful space. But I've not been brave enough, to be honest. I've not really thought about that, if it's impossible lens before. And I find that really, really inspiring. And it just blew my mind and really got me thinking, as you're watching this, as you're reflecting as I speak, Do you like disruption? Do you like challenging the status quo? Maybe, maybe not. Do you enjoy doing work that's worthy? And do you like that challenge around something that's maybe a little bit more of a challenge than the average person, whoever that may be, may take on? It just really, really piqued my interest. If you hear a dog, that's Winnie the Cockapoo. I may well show you her later if she barges in on me. Something else that I found really, really interesting is when Aisha shared that it needed to be a founder who I fell in work love with. I got to be honest, like I'm sitting here right now going, I've been in the same job for over 12 years now, really do, rate the CEO of our company. I rate so many people in the organization. But do I really love the people? Do I really get upset? Do I get excited at 9 o'clock every morning, knowing that the work I'm going to do is going to be worthy and make a difference in the world? Not that often. Not because the company's bad, not because I'm bad, not because anybody in the business is bad. It's just, is it the sort of business that truly, truly, truly you can fall in love with? And each person's different. And that's something I'm really exploring at the moment. Really, really fascinated by that. It needed to be a founder who I fell in work love with. I'd love to hear from you. Drop it in the comments, either now or at some point in the future. If that resonates with you, you needed to work somewhere that, it doesn't have to be a founder, it could be any organization where you fell in work love with your line manager or your senior leaders or CEO. I'm really privileged actually where I work at the moment to have, I wouldn't say I've fallen in work love with him, but we've got a very close relationship and I'm really grateful for that one. When I then look at, this really, really blew my mind. I currently in my day job work within, the distribution system, chemical supply chain, the global supply chain. That's my day job. And what I shared, which is what I call a gold dust piece of insight, was I think of the internet as a virtual transportation system. Just think about that. That's what it is. Yeah, it's maybe not transporting in and of itself the physical goods, but is an enabler of goods to travel all around the world. And it also carries goods in and of itself in terms of knowledge. Just blew my mind, really blew my mind. I've never thought of the internet as a virtual transportation system. Really, really interesting. Another piece regarding the philosophy and mindset of Aisha that I found really interesting is where she said, I'm a big proponent of the whole life. So as some people might call it work-life balance, Aisha calls it more of a whole life. I call it whole person living. But this is really, really important distinction. Again, this is just my reflections as Gary Turner. What I found interesting is on the one hand, Aisha's really a proponent of the whole life, but she was very clear to make a distinction between when she's at work and when she's at home. And we all know that difficulty now during the pandemic, really, switching off from work and then becoming the parent, the partner, the dog owner, whatever your life looks like. But what I took away in how Aisha communicated was that keeping them distinct but not separate is important. And I'm going to repeat that because this is something that really resonated with me. Keeping your work life and your personal life distinct, knowing what the boundaries are, but not separate, is really, really important. That resonated with me really, really deeply. Because it's very easy to look at this quite binary, that like work-life balance, or it's all work or it's all life. But no, it's actually about that intentionality of putting the boundary in place, I feel, between when you're at work and then when you're at home, and how that then builds up into being that whole life. And I just found that amazingly powerful. We'd love to hear from you if that resonates from you as well in the comments or at some point in the future. Another topic that I loved is as Whitney and Aisha were exploring, technology, the human, how they intersect with one another. Aisha shared, don't underestimate the human brain. Let's not sell ourselves short. We have intuition and we have soul. Mic drop moment for me. How often do we hear a CEO talking about intuition and soul? What I'm used to hearing throughout all of my career of over 25 years is metric, process. They are needed. They are important parts of running a business, in this century, although I think it's going to be shifting. What I've never, ever heard from any CEO is around intuition and soul. The only other CEOs that I've heard make any sort of public declaration like that are Gary Ridge, CEO of WD-40, who leads with his tribe, and also Barry Waymiller Bob Chapman, CEO of Barry Waymiller, where he talks about genuinely caring and that everybody matters within the organization. I've never heard, and I'm not come into contact with many, or heard many tech CEOs, but to hear Aisha sharing so clearly and so obviously for her, we have intuition and we have soul. Don't underestimate the human brain, and don't sell our spirit short. Just beautiful. Also, this is really, really critically important. Think about the social justice challenges we have, the world challenges that we have as everybody's realizing how interconnected every single thing and everybody is. It's hard to be a meanie to someone you have an intimate conversation with. Just another incredible mic drop moment for me. Think of all the best conversations you've had. Think about the most comfortable yet challenging conversations you've had. Who have they been with? What's that environment set up like? How did it feel? When you felt awkward, do you feel you could still move through that sort of treacle of a difficult conversation? Or did you run away from it? It's hard to be a meanie to someone who you are having an intimate conversation with. More intimate conversations, please. But for me, that means slowing down. That means being really intentional. That having an intimate conversation means a deeper conversation. It means going beyond just the job title. So important. And then the final point I wanted to wrap up with around the mindset piece. So around the mindset and what I call philosophy piece for Aisha is where she was talking about the fact that I just hope we all believe in the human spirit. Leadership and solving things happen through conversations and not through stating opinions. If you check out my LinkedIn profile today, I shared this morning actually from a UK radio station. There's a very, very good, challenging host called James O'Brien. And he was challenging a football supporter that rung in to say why he was objecting to the England team and football players taking a knee and why he booed them. And over a 5-minute discussion, what was very clear is the person that rung in, the caller, was stating his opinion as to why he can boo them, but still want the England team to perform at their best. Complete contradiction. And it's just really interesting as I reflect on what I listened to this morning and this reflection from Aisha. It's just really, really clear. We can't have brilliant performance. We can't drive the best outcomes for planet, purpose, profit, and everybody and everything on it if we're coming from a place of judgment and believing we're right. Just can't do it. And I just think, thank you, Aisha, for just summarizing this, what I class as your philosophy and your mindset in just such a powerful, powerful way. And as the CEO of a company of over 1,300 people, just absolutely spellblinding. Moving on to culture and teamwork. I'm realizing that I'm going on a little bit, but I think this is important. I'm hoping this serves somebody at some point in the future. So around the culture and teamwork point, Aisha, off her tongue, this rolled off her tongue without a second thought. She lives and breathes and energetically brings this forward. Our values at Zoox, our values are we are mission driven, we are inquisitive, we trust each other, and we are one Zoox. Bang, 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 bang. And she spoke to, and this is interesting, again, back to that sort of joining the dots piece. If you think about those 4 areas, everything that Aisha shared went back to each of those 4 areas. Just the alignment, the congruence is something that really blew my mind, which is one of the big reasons why I wanted to share my reflections. And I invite you to go and listen to the conversation between Whitney and Aisha. She also shared that we're here for a worthy output, which links back to that point I mentioned earlier. This is really important. We all get an A or we all get an F. It's not only good for the team, but it's also good for every single person. I also think my good friend, my good acquaintance, I like to think of him as a friend and CEO of WD-40, Gary Ridge. He wrote a book in a very, very similar vein, similar mindset around how about we organize and we set up our organizations to ensure that everybody's moving towards getting that A, that we're not leaving people languishing at the bottom, just being ticked off or eroded or walked out of a business because they're only performing at an F. If someone's performing at an F, it's the team's responsibility to bring that person up. And that comes back to this next point that Aisha shared brilliantly, which is the most important is not the strongest employee. It is the weakest link in the chain. Now, this is interesting for me because I often have this tension between the strengths-based model, which I think is really good, and it's important to focus on our strengths, but we can't ignore the weaknesses. Whether that's a person, whether it's a process, whether it's how we show up, whether it's the energy levels we have, whatever it looks like, we have to be looking at the whole system holistically. Otherwise, we are going to have some element of dysfunction. And it reminds me of another example, which is focus on the slowest hiker as a mountain metaphor. You can't get to the top of a mountain or a hill as a team if you're not focusing on the person that maybe is having the most difficulty with altitude or struggling to get up that hill. So moving on, I really loved how Whitney got excited as well around this point that human problems being solved by technology. Aisha spoke about what makes it possible or what makes it prevent you experiencing something is so important. She says, I'm a technologist in service of humanity and not just in terms of happy engineering. So interesting. I think that's such an interesting reflection. Technology is here to serve human beings and the world, I would say, and we're seeing that now. And I'm very early stage in this regenerative world, so I'm not speaking it through any lens of expertise. But I'm now, I sponsor and I support Amazon Frontlines. I work in an industry that is extractive. So my own small way of trying to pay it back is at this time is to donate monthly to Amazon Frontlines, as they are being, Amazon tribes are being displaced due to a mix of deforestation, due to land loss, due to only in part, oil refineries being able to drill on what was their indigenous lands. So when we think about these topics, it's really important because those indigenous peoples now are using technology to better track where these land grabs are happening, for example. So technology is aiding humans, but also in line with nature as well, increasingly. That's a really interesting lens to be thinking about. Also, what I found particularly interesting, again, myself being part of a global supply chain, is that Aisha shared, you have to appreciate the whole value chain. Didn't say supply chain, didn't say culture, the whole value chain. How do we make people, quote, be part of the team no matter where they are in the value chain? And she shares brilliantly, Aisha, one of her biggest learning moments with Whitney, where she speaks about someone that was a dishwasher in a restaurant that she once owned. And by not focusing on that dishwasher, then you could end up being penalized heavily by literally the restaurant shutting down because you didn't have enough clean crockery and glasses and cutlery, etc., coming back. So think about your value chain in your own life, but also in the workplace. Like, where do you add value, and where else are those intersections of value within the role in which you operate? You are not in a silo. You are not an island. I am not. You are not. So think about your intersections within your teams and your communities, within your own family life and social life. Do you value every one of those connections equally with equity, or do you hold some in lesser regard? And I'm definitely guilty of thinking of some of those connections in lesser regard, and that's something I'm really taking away powerfully from this conversation, which is really helpful for me. What Aisha also shared was that human beings want to be cared for. They want to be valued. So they have at Zoox a philosophy of why everybody matters. And again, makes me think about Raj Sisodia and Bob Chapman's book, Everybody Matters, which is absolutely critical. And also makes me think about, I'm very grateful to be one of the caring leadership coaches supporting Heather Younger and her new caring leadership community. Her new book, The Art of Caring Leadership, is now out. It's come out within the last few weeks. And it's absolutely brilliant, and is really a playbook to how to lead with more care in the workplace. So do go check that one out as well. This was a particularly powerful moment for me, where Aisha shared, you can hear in her voice the tension, the difficulty of stepping out of an important business, commercial, worthy meeting linked to the organization's objectives and mission to go and drop her child off at school. But she made that judgment call once. Phone call, Dad's not here to pick me up, to take me to school, can you take me? Aisha made the decision in that moment to let her team continue with the presentation and her go and drop off her child. Would you do that? Would I do that? I would do that. I know categorically I would do that. But would you? In amongst the busyness and humdrum of day to day. Really powerful reflection. I think a CEO role modeling that is so powerful. So powerful. We're still on the teamwork and culture piece that I took away from this conversation. Bearing in mind the conversation was 45 minutes, I could end up going into my reflections across 45 minutes, so feel free to jump through and back and in and out as you would like. This I also found really powerful, back to this team dynamic, that value of trust that Aisha spoke about being one of the 4 key values of Zoox. She said, you have a problem over there. How do we help? Not it's your problem, crack on, we're going to leave you to suffer. No, everything is part of a system. If one team is suffering, again, that lowest hiker, that slowest person, that dishwasher, in theory, in the restaurant, if someone is struggling, we are all struggling. A bit of a Ubuntu makes me think about my good friend Cornell Thomas and also Tracy Fenton. You know, they're both big proponents of Ubuntu. You know, I am, therefore we are. Like an African proverb. It's very, very true, and it's really being expressed here as part of this conversation between Whitney and Aisha. This is the bit. I'm not a mathematician. I wasn't great. I was okay at maths, but I wasn't great at maths at all. But you've got to listen to this whole conversation, even if it's just for this nugget. The area under the curve and the sum, okay? The sum of the individual outputs does not necessarily give you the best collective output. Your ability to minimize the gaps will determine your success if you're doing something that is big, highly integrated, and disruptive. And I think we're going into a world where you cannot be anything but that big, highly integrated, and disruptive. I think pretty much everything's going to be that quite often. So I think we need to get used to trying to minimize those gaps. And I love this visual that Aisha creates for us, that, you know, it's not just about adding to, it really is about squeezing those gaps out so that you get perfect alignment across your system and across your organization and across your people. And you're probably taking away how, like, this is just like blow me. Like, yes, I've written this down, but like, so much of this is just flow for me. It's just really, really blew my mind, this conversation. And something else that was really interesting, and this is what got me about Aisha, is that she's so effortless in how she blends from CEO to parent to humanitarian to leader to coach to empath to delegator. Like, this whole human, it just blows my mind. Go and listen to this. Honestly, it just got me. And again, one of the other things that got me was when she said, if you can't tell me what's wrong with you, that is probably a problem. And she was referencing their recruitment process at this time in the conversation. But I think that goes for anything. If we can't communicate, if we cannot get out in words from our being what is wrong with us, how can someone else help us? Now, sometimes we need help with that, and that's why I love the thinking environment, something that I'm a practitioner in, and my wonderful coach, Jane Atteg Grant, is a master practitioner in the thinking environment, where you create an environment for someone to think for themselves, as themselves, free from interruption. That's a great way to help someone work out what is wrong with them if they can't find the voice. However, if you can't find the voice after that process, it really is a problem, because how can someone help you? Just so interesting. And also linked to this, they're having a great discussion, Whitney and Aisha, about, you know, if someone has a problem, what happens in your organization right now? Someone's got a problem with you. Do they come and let you know? Are they adult enough to say, hey, in my case, hey, Gary, you really pissed me off on that occasion. Like, you spoke over me, you undermined me, you were patriarchal. I've had that recently, by the way, from someone in my network, which was devastating but necessary learning for me because of the language I was using. You know, do we believe that people wake up in the morning and decide to be an AH or do a bad job? Because those are different sets of questions for Aisha. Do you think they have some merit in what they're saying? If so, that's another set of questions. However, this is the real gold nugget for me. And I think this goes for any part of our lives. If you haven't talked to the person, quote, about how you feel about them, you don't get to tell that to me, or you don't get to tell me. Just beautiful adult. Like, I think it's transactional analysis or something. I think it's like a way of being around this. You know, how do you ensure that you come together as adults to diffuse, have the conversation that you need, so that if you do need to go and have a conversation and escalate, this is the last point around teamwork and culture for me that Aisha shared. If you are going to escalate, quote, on people, you need to escalate together. So you need to have had that dialogue. You need to be coming not just with a solution necessarily, but with a clear objective of solving this particular challenge. And part of the solving might be someone leaving the business, but at least you've done the work as adults, and then we'll come to a conclusion at the end. Just like adult humanity leading one of the most high-tech organizations that's going to be going into the future of autonomous vehicles. That gives me hope. And also what gives me hope, as a sidebar, is Aisha Evans is a black woman leading 1,300 people in Silicon Valley. Why did I mention that specifically? Because a lot of conversation around bias in AI, and I would like to think that when we do step into these autonomous vehicles, because of the lived experience that I'm undoubtedly Aisha comes with, and I'm sure that she's engaging with her development teams, there's probably a pretty good chance that the diversity of those teams, it's an assumption, I'd love to be challenged on that, and maybe Aisha, you can let me know, it's one of my questions for you, is how intentionally diverse are those development teams, those software teams, as you're developing, to make sure that we don't have any racial bias. For example, a black man walking across the street and the software hasn't been designed to take into account that particular profile. Really interesting debate, that one. So we've touched on the mindset philosophy that I took from Aisha talking to Whitney, discussed the teamwork and cultural elements. Now wrapping up on the final couple of comments. So the first is around vulnerability. So part of this conversation is where Aisha shared that they, referencing San Francisco, Silicon Valley people, can become a prisoner of their ambition or their wants and needs. Oh my God, stake in the heart. Totally spoke to me personally around that. That's totally where I've been stuck in the past personally, without a doubt. Still fall into it from time to time now, but far less. But just a great reflection for all of us. Are we so wrapped up in our own ego and our own belief of self-importance, innocently or otherwise, that we can't actually be vulnerable? Or we can't actually ask for help? Question. Really, really interested on that. And this was another really beautiful example of vulnerability from a CEO of 1,300 person high-tech company. I've had to look in the mirror and say, don't be a brat during the pandemic. Grow up, don't be like a brat, and take a chill pill. Aisha sharing this publicly on Whitney's Disrupt Yourself podcast, just a brilliant, brilliant role modeling of vulnerability. Vulnerability, as I shared on that podcast, over 138 episodes, does not have to be warts and all of the time. It can be just this great little example. Look in the share with the rest of the world. I at times can be a bit of a brat. I know it. I need to grow up and take a chill pill and be grateful for what I do have, and not just focus on what I don't or how hard my life feels in this particular moment. Great vulnerability, superb human being, Aisha. Just thank you so much for how you show up. And I think it reminds me, there's a podcast, a new podcast I have, I'm into episode 15, which is Activating Consciousness. And I think this is partly why I've been so excited to share these reflections and invite you to go and learn yourself, take away what you want to take away, build on these reflections of mine. It's really because this is an activating consciousness conversation for me. It's one that it's a revealing of consciousness, as my friend Helen Amory shared with me previously on the podcast. We are all good enough. We are all clever. We are all connected. We are all included at the beginning, and we then learn through systems and through society and through our own stories to sort of navigate away from that. And I just love how Aisha's just wrapping an arm around all of this and saying we've got a job to do. Let's get on with it. Let's be adults. Let's act as a team. Let's follow those 4 key values. Let's role model them as she clearly does, and let's just do brilliant, world-changing work together. Oh, I want to work at Zoox one day, maybe. Just completely just mind-blowing. And I think it's a good example, right? I can sit here as someone that works in a completely different industry and go, you are the type of leader, Aisha Evans, that I would want to go and work for. You would make me come and work for you because of the values and how you show up and what you espouse. Just amazing. Absolutely amazing. So the final point I wanted to share were 2 things. One is on self-awareness, and the last one is a couple of open questions. So one is a moment of self-awareness. So Whitney asked this brilliant coaching question at the end, something around what is this conversation giving you, Aisha, on reflection? What are you taking away that's going to help you think differently or maybe change how you operate? And what she shared is that something that might be number 50 on Aisha's list might be number 5 on somebody else's list. So being empathetic to that and being clear on where a particular topic sits between 2 people is going to help navigate how well that particular issue gets sorted or resolved. My words, not Aisha's. Just really, really fascinating. So thank you, Aisha. Thank you, Whitney. Stunning, stunning, stunning conversation. Absolutely mind-blowing. And I just want to finish with a couple of open questions, and I'm going to follow up with Whitney on this as well. And hopefully, Aisha, if you don't mind, I'd love to hear from you as to what your response would be. One is, first of all, you mentioned that you have Marshall, who I'm grateful to be connected to on LinkedIn as well. How valuable has it been having Marshall Goldsmith as your coach? What has the most profound learnings been for you? What have you learned most about you by having your space held by Marshall over time? I'd love to hear that reflection, one question. And the second, more direct question is, and this comes back, I work in the chemical industry, I understand the importance of accessing rare earth metals that are going to semiconductors, into chips, which no doubt are going to be powering these autonomous vehicles that Zoox are buying. I would love to better understand openly, and just through curiosity, the raw materials that are being sourced that are going to go into manufacturing the autonomous vehicles that Zoox are producing. How intentionally regenerative is the supply chain that you are integrating into these autonomous vehicles? So what I mean by that is, how intentional is the supply chain in all directions? Are you looking at circular supply chains where you're looking at reuse, upusing, reusing, anything that's waste that's going back into production processes, etc. So I'm really curious around the circularity or regenerative intentions of Zoox as an organization. Maybe it's too early stage, maybe it's a bit of a secondary phase, but I'm really interested to know that. It would inspire me to the max to know that regeneration and circular economy around the raw materials and supply chain that are supplying and the ecosystem that you're part of, that this circularity thought process is indeed part of your design for Zoox. Would love to hear about that too. So I invite everybody, please go and check out Zoox, fascinating organization. Go and check out Aisha's LinkedIn profile. Please do go and follow Whitney's work. Go and have a conversation. Go and follow up on her podcast, Disrupt Yourself, her book, Disrupt Yourself, and Build an A-Team, which is another book from Whitney, which I absolutely love. And finally, if you've watched this, I appreciate it. I hope it's offered you some value. I'm really keen to support people stepping into their wholeness. I've gone through my own vulnerability journey. I'm supporting Heather from being one of her caring leadership coaches. I'm really, really keen to support human beings that want to show up as the fullest, unashamed version of themselves. Do that. So I'm here to support you. And if you'd like to have an exploratory conversation, you can find my Calendly at Gary Turner Strategic Advisor. And I would love just to explore, is there any opportunity to work with you, support you, hold space with you on a one-to-one basis? I also offer workshops, human-centered workshops and hackathons. One great example is where we hacked over 8 hours with an international team of 29 people, over 40 co-created ideas that came from 502 data points in less than 8 hours. And 25% of those 40, so 10 ideas that came out of that co-created experience, were implemented within the next 24 hours. So very, very keen to try and do more of that work as well. I also do keynote talks around leading as a whole human being, the power of vulnerability, and the value add of human-centered design. So if any of that stuff could be interesting, do let me know. You can find me, as I say, on Calendly. You can find me on LinkedIn. And I just really invite you to dive into this conversation. It's a huge conversation, me personally, and I think it's going to add real value to you. So until next time, I'm doing a whole range of right here, right now, live broadcasts onto YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook. I'm averaging 2 per week, and you can find the schedule on the YouTube playlist, which I will share at I might try and share it. I don't know, maybe it'll work. Not sure. Anyway, have a great evening, have a great morning, have a great evening, wherever you are in the world. I hope you've got some value if you've listened to any element of this, and have a fantastic time whatever you're doing. Take care. Gary Turner, over and out. Not sure if I'll use that ending again, but I might do. Take care for now.
I just want to say that of all the wonderful people I've had a chance to meet, it's just amazing how authentically Gary shows up.
Get away from the myopic focus on just the metrics. We need to be looking at vulnerability, curiosity, what it means to be human, and have the human conversations that are so often missing in the workplace.